Welcome back to History on a Hog. I'm your host, Cap'n Boz. Well, I've been on a road trip through the Midwest, heading towards the annual Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And along the way, I decided that I would take a look at the life and career of Wild Bill Hickok, the most celebrated gambler and lawman of the Old West. In part 1, I covered the events in his early career that made him famous, including the shootout at the Rock Creek, Nebraska Pony Express station, where it was said he killed 4 men. And in part 2, I described his most famous events that made him a legend, including the duel with Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri, then his violent approach at cleaning up the wild railroad town of Hays City, Kansas, and finally, in his shootout with Phil Coe and the Rowdy Cowboys at the Alamo Saloon in Abilene, Kansas. It was during this melee that he accidentally shot and killed his deputy and friend, Mike Williams, mistaking him for a cowboy who was trying to gun him down. Interestingly, this gunfight would be Hickok's last. On December 13th, the Abilene City Council dismissed the 34-year-old lawman and all of his deputies. The cattle season was over, and so too was the wild partying in town. So Abilene officials decided to terminate the services of this expensive and violent marshal. The price was simply too high in costs and in lives. Hickok would never wear a badge again. And since he was a guy who never bothered to explain himself to anyone, it's a matter of speculation why he gave up law enforcement. Was it because he had lost his nerve after the accidental shooting of his friend? These questions are open to debate. But one thing is not. James Butler Wild Bill Hickok was a changed man after the shootout at the Alamo Saloon in Abilene. But regardless of whether or not Hickok's nerve was intact, his eyesight was not. It was failing fast and getting worse. Newspaper reports from 1874 suggests that he was suffering from glaucoma, which there was no treatment for in those days. He was going blind, and this was probably the real reason why he never returned to law enforcement. Once again, he was broke. In late 1873, Hickok tried acting in Wild West shows out east with his old friend, Buffalo Bill Cody. But he hated it. And by March of 1874, he was essentially fired by Buffalo Bill. In the end, Wild Bill decided that it was time for him to return home to the West. But by the mid-1870s, the western frontier as Hickok knew it was changing, and Hickok was suffering the full effects of glaucoma. He decided that perhaps it was time for him to settle down. And on March 5th, 1876, he did just that. He settled down and got married. He married Agnes Thatcher Lake in Cheyenne, in the Wyoming Territory. He had started a romance with her when he was the marshal in Abilene. So after leaving the Buffalo Bill show in New York, he headed back west looking for her. He would eventually find her in Cheyenne, where they got married. After marrying her, Hickok needed money to support his new wife. Since he was done with law enforcement, he decided he would seek his fortune in the newly discovered gold fields in the Dakota territories, specifically in the Black Hills. In July of 1874, Lieutenant Colonel George Custer and the 7th Cavalry mounted a huge expedition into Lakota Sioux territory in the Black Hills, where they found gold. Lots of it. This would open up the floodgates of people pouring into the Black Hills, establishing mining camps with prospectors, shopkeepers, saloons, gambling houses, and brothels. Deadwood would be the first of these camps to pop up. With the news of gold being discovered in the Black Hills in the spring of 1876, Wild Bill joined up with his old friend, Colorado Charlie Utter, in Cheyenne, and they soon headed up to Deadwood. So departing Cheyenne, he would travel up to Deadwood via wagon train that included Martha Jane Cannery, aka Calamity Jane, and this would be the beginning of their famous friendship. She was constantly at his side while in Deadwood. She was clearly smitten with him. In fact, after his death, Calamity Jane would later claim that she had secretly married Wild Bill in Deadwood. But I will leave the complexities of their relationship to other historians to unravel. Deadwood had a violent reputation as a lawless outpost of the frontier, and to Hickok, Deadwood seemed the ideal place to make some money at gold prospecting and gambling. But history notes that Hickok did far more gambling than digging. While in Deadwood, Wild Bill became a regular poker player at Nuttall and Mann Saloon No. 10, one of the many saloon establishments in Deadwood. And given Wild Bill's celebrity, business at the No. 10 tripled overnight. His presence alone was bringing in gamblers from all over the territory who wanted to play against the West's most famous gambler and gunslinger. On the afternoon of August 2nd of 1876, Wild Bill was playing cards with his back to the door, something he never did. A young drifter named Jack McCall calmly walked in and approached Hickok from behind. It has been speculated that McCall believed that Hickok had killed his brother back in Abilene some years prior. There's just one problem with this theory. McCall did not have a brother. It is most likely, however, that McCall wanted to make a name for himself as the man who killed Wild Bill, the most famous gunfighter of the time. And killing Hickok, McCall speculated, would make him very famous. So when McCall entered No. 10 Saloon and saw that Hickok was sitting with his back to the door, he saw his opportunity. Hickok had never been known to have his back to the door, but for some reason, on this particular night, he made an exception. Some eyewitnesses believed that he did this intentionally, because they had heard him say that he was tired of being Wild Bill, the legend, the celebrity. So many people believe that he left himself intentionally vulnerable to be killed and accepting his fate. So upon seeing Wild Bill in this vulnerable position, McCall saw his opportunity and calmly walked up behind Wild Bill and shot him in the back of the head at point-blank range, killing him instantly. This is how the most celebrated Western hero of his time, of all time really, met his end. McCall was immediately apprehended and brought to trial the next day by the town's impromptu miners' court. Incredibly, he was found not guilty after telling judges that Hickok had killed his brother years before. And unbelievably, they released him. But less than a month later, a territorial appellate court found that the trial had no legal status because Deadwood was located in Indian territory, not within U.S. territory. So McCall's trial and acquittal was deemed invalid. McCall was quickly arrested on August 29th of 1876 in Laramie, Wyoming, only 2 weeks after the death of Hickok, and he was put on trial in Yankton in the Dakota Territory. And he was quickly found guilty and hanged on March 1st of 1877. This is what the Number 10 Saloon looked like today on the modern streets of Deadwood. I had a chance to check it out with my riding buddies, Cy, Peter, Keith, Mike, and Matt, as part of our Sturgis Rally visit over the summer. Notice the death chair over the entrance of the Number 10 Saloon. It is supposedly the chair where Wild Bill was killed, but many historians dispute this claim today. More than likely, it's tourist bait, a recreation of the chair in order to draw in customers.
One he likely killed, the other he killed
Hickok is famously buried here in Deadwood at the Mt Moriah Cemetery. And right next to him is Calamity Jane. Her wish fulfilled when on her deathbed in 1903, she demanded that she be buried right next to Wild Bill and in the same cemetery with all her old Deadwood friends, like Seth Bullock. And as you can see, Wild Bill's gravesite is a shrine to him, and it has always been so from the day he was buried here in 1876. It still attracts thousands of people per year to Deadwood. Even today, Wild Bill is still the most famous resident of Deadwood.
His legacy has withstood the test of time. What more can a man ask for? Well, I hope you enjoyed the series. I found it fascinating and interesting in putting it together, and I certainly covered a lot of territory out here. The riding through the prairies and the Black Hills of South Dakota are both mesmerizing and incredible, and even a little spooky. It's hard not to wonder if there are still some very angry spirits wandering around out here. But you certainly can't argue about the beauty of this place. It's just spectacular, especially at dawn or dusk. I hope you get a chance to experience it. I highly recommend it. Well, this concludes my series. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to ride safe. And I hope to see you again for another episode of History on a Hog.